Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Everybody Talks Some Movie podcast. I'm Cole Weinstein, and I'm joined here today by a good buddy of mine, DeVaughn Taylor. How you doing, DeVaughn?
Doing good. How you doing, man? I'm real excited to talk about one of my favorite animated movies.
I am too. Today we are talking about the 2009 stop-motion horror film Coraline. It's an all-time favorite of both DeVaughn and mine, and it's a really important film to my film-watching career and one that I've always really wanted to do a deep dive into. So get ready for a spoiler-filled and in-depth discussion of Coraline. So as I mentioned in the opening, Coraline is a really important film to me and a really important film to my film watching maturation. It's the first film that really showed me how fun it is to be scared. When I was younger, I really avoided anything that scared me because it was something that took me out of my comfort zone and made me uncomfortable. And I wouldn't have seen Coraline if I'd known how scary it actually was. I saw it in theaters in 2009 when it came out and I was 10. And I went to go see it because the trailers made it look really unscary, and I thought that it was going to be one of those lame sort of faux scary movies for really little kids. And I thought that it would be kind of cool, I don't know, to walk in and not be scared by these sort of cheap attempts at making little kids scared. And boy, was I wrong. This film terrified me at the age of 10 and even still terrifies me now because it's such a really well-made movie. And I just can remember sinking into my seat and watching sort of the first of the two climaxes of the movie when she's trying to escape the other mother's lair from climbing up the spider web, and just I was actually terrified that she wouldn't make it. And I just remember that feeling because it was something so new to me. And it's really now what makes me love a movie is when I can feel that intense tension and that fear. And I really owe a lot of that love to Coraline. DeVaughn, what are your thoughts overall on this film?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I wasn't as young as you were whenever I saw this movie, but I remember it came out whenever I was in high school. And I've always been into, darker movies and such. I mean, Henry Selick directed Nightmare Before Christmas. Everybody always just assumes it's Tim Burton. Henry Selick actually is the director of it. And so obviously I was going to like this movie a lot. And it also kind of fits into my movie sensibilities as well, as far as liking movies that are a little bit on the weirder side or a little bit on the creepier side, but at the same time, it really showed the range that an animated movie could have, that it could, tell a mature story, but still, inherently a kid's movie. But at the same time, like, it is very dark. I mean, it very well almost could be not a kid's movie if they added like a few more elements into it, which I think that'd be interesting. The unrated version of Coraline, that's a movie I want to see. But yeah, no, I love this movie. I've always admired stop motion animation as an art. It's a dying art in movies these days. We don't really get a lot of it, and I wish there would be more. But because the stop animation is gorgeous, and this is also a movie that really showed me how to build a world, like to really take you while you're watching this movie and take you and transport you into another place. Like this movie does that with having a setting that's still familiar, but then once you go to the other world and it's just this whole other thing, and it's just like it really showed me like a movie could build a world from bottom to top, and then kind of take you to that place and give you an experience. And we were saying beforehand, this was a movie I didn't get to see in theaters. I really wish I would. Hoping that one day they re-release in theaters so that way I could like kind of experience it, because I'm all about the theater going experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love you talking about that world building idea of this movie, because this movie really does sort of take a unique, in a weird way, almost meta look at world building, in that you obviously have the amazing and really chilling, as you watch it again, opening scene where the other mother is making this doll to spy on Coraline and spot what's wrong with her life. And the doll watches Coraline's world, which at this point is just this house, and quite literally builds a world that is this house but better. And I love that moment where the cat, who's really voiced excellently by Keith David. I love that they got Keith David to voice the cat because he works so well in this movie. And
Yeah.
he takes her to the edge of the world and it just turns white. And then I love when she goes, "How are we already back at the house?" And he goes, "Well, you walked all the way across the world." And I love how this world is made and how it sort of deconstructs world building in that it shows sort of how this small world is made and really done exactly to capture the attention of Coraline and to ultimately suck her in and get her to want to stay there forever.
Yeah, and you mentioned Keith David, a very underrated voice performance in this movie. Underrated voice cast altogether. I mean, you got Dakota Fanning in the lead, which is like I didn't even realize that was her until like 3 years afterwards. I was like, wait, this Dakota Fanning, and then of course you got Ian McShane as Mr. Bobinski, another amazing vocal choice for the movie. But yeah, the movie does kind of take a little meta way, I suppose you could say, because it's almost like, you know, you're looking in a mirror whenever you're watching this movie, and she goes to the other side, and you really get that feel of you know, the duality between the worlds that she's in. And then this is a movie that also really made me start paying attention to scores in movies. You know, like whenever I was younger, you know, pre-cinephile days, didn't really, you know, think about music in movies as much as I do now. And now it's like one of my most important things. But the score for Coraline is very unique. This choir that they used to do all the vocals and stuff. It was the first time that I could like hear a score of a movie and know what movie it was, you know, versus, you know, vice versa. Like I could finally, like, I was like, that is, you know, 100% the Coraline score. So, you know, this kind of movie helped me start listening out for that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to talk about the score too. Done really well by, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Bruno Calais. I looked through his stuff, and he's done a lot of stuff. He's a pretty accomplished guy who scores movies, but is like most of them are foreign films and movies that really aren't in the American mainstream conscience. And it was so cool to hear this really unique voice, and that's really what I picked up on watching this movie again. I hadn't seen it for about a year, and through that year, between the two times I watched it, I've really learned a lot about filmmaking and become even more of a cinephile. And to really listen to how unique the score is and really how diverse it is, in that it's not just sort of the same sound and the same song being played over again in different variations. There's a lot of diversity to how it's played, and it almost feels like it's scored by multiple people because the songs sound different enough from each other, and it really works, and it really adds to the tension of this film, which I also really appreciate just how well made this is technically. I haven't noticed that in the past, and I think all that really adds to this incredible pacing of this movie. It's the second longest stop motion film ever made, a minute shorter than Kubo and the Two Strings, which was another Laika film. And I really think a lot of the reason why the pacing is so good in this movie is because it is so technically well made. If you've listened to the previous two episodes, you know that I'm a big fan of a dynamic camera movement. I talked about it with both The Dark Knight and Alien, both two great episodes in the past that you should listen to. And how dynamic this camera is, with whether it be pans or zooming in, to really make this world feel that much more exciting and intense. And Pete Kozacek, who was the DP also on Corpse Bride, James and the Giant Peach, and Nightmare Before Christmas, does a great job with this movie and really makes it look super, super unique and super exciting. And that really adds to this really exciting, intense pacing.
Yeah, that's why I said, you know, I really admire stop motion as an art form because, I mean, one, it's incredibly hard to, you know, do for one. Like, you know, Nightmare Before Christmas is only 76 minutes and it took, you know, 2.5 years to do just because it requires so much time and patience. So, I mean, just that in itself, and yeah, to, you know, kind of make these longer stop motion movies, because, I mean, Corpse Bride, James and the Giant's Peach, those are also very short movies as well, both under an hour and 20 minutes. So for, you know, them to do Coraline is what, about an hour 45 or something like that?
Yeah, hour 40.
Yeah, hour 40. So, I mean, it's up there for one. And then not only that, on top of that, do you have the stop motion going on. This movie was in 3D as well. And this was a movie that the 3D actually lent itself well. You know, this was back in the times that maybe we could have, if we had the actual clear lenses instead of the ones for this one were actually purple and green. It wasn't red and blue. But you do have like that tint the whole time you're watching the movie. But the 3D in this is actually pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was 2009. It actually came out several months before Avatar did. So that also shows you sort of where we were at 3D at this point. And it is really extremely impressive 3D for when it came out, and it still really holds up well today. And the other thing that I noticed that I thought was really cool, and I look back at another one of my favorite stop motion films, Anomalisa, and I noticed stop motion films actually use this a lot, which is the use of the POV shot and how well it really works in this movie to show Coraline's perspective and to just once again make things different and unique for the brain, which is what adds to making this movie such a easy watch from a pacing perspective and a movie that's not tough to get through at all because there's so much different interesting stuff that's being thrown at you. Your brain is just always interested in whatever's going on.
Yeah, and the movie does a good job of really putting you in Coraline's shoes. I mean, that's where the point of view comes from. Like, when we were talking about what this movie, what we thought about it, like what we thought it boiled down to, and I think it boils down to perspective, because you're seeing the world, the way that Coraline sees it. She's in this new environment. It's pretty boring, and you're seeing her have this negative perspective in this aspect, and she just assumes she's going to hate the place. She assumes she's going to hate her neighbors. She, at first doesn't want to be friends with YB and all this kind of stuff. And then she goes into this other world, sees things the way that she wants them to be. But then, that gives her the perspective of, what she does have going on isn't so bad. Like what in her, quote unquote, regular life, that it's not so boring like she thinks it is. And you're really brought into that because you go along this journey with Coraline, and that's where the writing and the world building like really go hand in hand, because you're just experiencing this world just as she is, and that's why it gets even scarier for you towards the end, because like you feel like you're in it, and you really have connected with Coraline through this journey, and then that's what puts you in this real state of terror. So I don't know. I love it because it does have a lot of horror undertones for sure to this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you talked about sort of her perspective changing on her neighbors and the new people in her life. And I think that's what makes that party scene at the end so great because it's really the end of Coraline's arc. And she's learned to accept the new world that she's living in and to really enjoy it. And I think her parents have really come around too. And I think that overall it's really cool not just to see this intense ride, but to really see the development of a super interesting character that you care about in Coraline. Another thing I want to bring up is you're talking about perspective and how it really hit me on this watch that this movie really is also a lot about growing up and sort of the move from a teenage or from a kid to the start of puberty and becoming a teenager. Coraline in the movie is 11 years old, which funny enough is the same age as Riley was in Inside Out. And it's interesting to see how a lot of this movie is sort of her entering a new environment, just like how she herself is changing and starting to grow up. And I think it's interesting that YB wasn't in the book, and they added him as not only a character who Coraline could communicate her thoughts to, but as sort of the first time she looks at a boy differently. Obviously, it's just a friendship with them, but it's something, and those tensions are starting to build. And there's something really interesting about the way this movie talks about growing up, and then also puts her in this world where she has to mature and be brave, and really go through a lot of really fast changes.
Yeah, I think YB's a really fun character. I mean, he has a ridiculous name to begin with, and then yeah, I think I definitely agree with she's interacting with a boy, like you said, the way she hasn't before, just because it is a new place and stuff and all this kind of stuff. But you definitely do get the tension. But then I also just YB's like what where the fear comes in for me, because I remember just seeing whenever she sees YB for the first time and he's got the buttons and now his mouth is sewn shut, like in the other YB world, and then she's like, how come he can't speak? And she's like, oh, I thought he should just talk a little less. I thought it'd make you happier. And then she like hangs out with him and he like never says a word the whole time. But no, like, so that's like kind of where the terror came in for me as well. Cause I thought that was it was always just done really creepy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the creepiest moment with him is when she gets thrown into the mirror by the other mother, and then he pulls her out, and she undoes his like mouth because it's all tied up to smile, and just like the mood and of that scene is just terrifying, and his smile and just it's one of those scenes because this movie does such a good job of just making you uncomfortable with these things like smiling, and it's so well done. It never ceases to freak me out.
Yeah, and you mentioned like this was the first movie that like you saw the fun and being scared and stuff, and we're both big horror fans, so we definitely love that in movies. But this was also one for like my family that was a big one, like because my sisters like they've come around to Nightmare Before Christmas now just because I forced them to watch it so many times, but they were never big fans before. But like Coraline, like when it first came out, they absolutely loved it, and it made no sense to me because I was like, this movie is just as dark as Nightmare Before Christmas, if not darker. But they loved it, and we would watch it like over and over again. Like we watched Coraline a bunch just because like they were like, it's so weird and it's so scary but so fun, and so like so it was kind of a nice little movie to bond with my sisters a little bit more.
Yeah,
And maybe it was because of the female protagonist. We have this relatable character that they could relate to a little bit more, and made it a little bit more enjoyable for them.
yeah, absolutely. And I actually did want to get into that. I think what I love so much about this movie as well is just how great of a female protagonist Coraline is. Coraline is actually my favorite female protagonist of all time, and it disappoints me that I don't see her mentioned with the Ripleys, the Sarah Connors, even a Hermione as like one of these great female protagonists. And I think what's so cool about her is not only is she a kid, so and I agree that protagonists and sort of these characters that you look up to are most important when you're younger, and you can have little girls watch Coraline and say, that's me. I'm 11, I'm 10, I'm like Coraline. And then to see her face her fears, I think is a really powerful thing. And the other thing that I've just always loved about Coraline is that I feel like they never treat her any differently than they would if it was a male protagonist. They're never like, pointing to the audience like, look, we have a female protagonist, look at how progressive we are. They always treat Coraline just like another character. And to me, I always thought that was so cool because I felt like everyone deserves to just have their character who like that you wouldn't treat any differently, who they it doesn't matter what gender she is. It just matters that Coraline is a great character and a character that you care about going through an arc that you care about. And I think that I've always thought that was really cool. And I wish that we had more female characters for the sake of just having a cool character.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I love her as a character for sure, and I definitely agree with that what you're saying. And I don't have like a list, I guess, of like my favorite female protagonists, but maybe it's just because being such a horror fan, and horror has always been a female dominated genre. When you really think about it, in terms of The Last Girl and these heroines that you go on these journeys with, and Coraline's definitely up there for sure. She is a character that she has flaws. She's not a perfect character. She's not always the most likable in the movie. There are times you like are annoyed by her, but at the same time, like she's she's a very human character, and then she's very courageous, like you said, and she kind of gets put in a situation where she has to be brave and face her fears, and we do see a very complete character arc, which I think is very underrated when it comes to animated films.
Yeah, absolutely. And you care about her. And I think I can never exactly tell why and what makes me care about a character, but I know a lot of times I won't like a movie as much as a lot of other people, especially movies for younger kids or even action movies where I just feel like I don't feel connected to this character. And I totally do about Coraline. I think part of it is just because she's so human and there's so much honesty to her character that you can't help but root for her because inherently like we want to root for people who feel human. And I think that's such a great aspect of her in total. And she's one of many incredible characters in this movie. And I think that's really due to the excellent voice acting. I know you mentioned that earlier, but I really don't think there's any bad vocal performance in this movie, but there's quite a few stellar ones. Do you have a particular favorite? I know you mentioned Keith David earlier.
Uh, I mean, definitely. I mean, I would say this is top three Dakota Fanning for me. I'd say she gives a like I said, I didn't even recognize her for a minute because it's this whole other character. It's its own thing. But I mean, it's got to be Ian McShane as Mr. Bobinski. He just says the most ridiculous things and says things that only Ian McShane can say. You know, I'm currently watching American Gods right now, and I was like thinking, I was like, man, I was like, did they even have to write any dialogue, or do they just tell Ian McShane to start talking and they record it? And it's, I feel like you could say the same thing about Coraline. It's just like all the ridiculous things he says, and you're just like, okay, yeah, I'm okay with that because Ian McShane is just, his delivery is so perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And he plays just such an oddball character, but it works for you. Like there's definitely sort of a weird disconnect from this movie world to our modern world, but it works and you totally buy it. And there's never a second where you're like, I don't know if I'm okay with this. And I think it is really due to his vocal performance and a lot of the other ones. Funny enough, you mentioned American Gods. Both American Gods and Coraline are based on source material written by the author Neil Gaiman, who is a
Mm-hmm.
really excellent author and is getting some of his other stuff has been announced that's going to be published either or released either in TV or movie format. As far as my favorite vocal performance, there's a lot of good ones. Both of the older ladies, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, are great. I think that they're super funny, and I love their dynamic and banter together. Dakota Fanning is excellent. I love her like slight Midwestern accent because she's from Michigan, moving over to Oregon. I thought that was really cool and a really nice touch by her. Keith David obviously is great, like Keith David voicing a cat. Like how cool is that? But I think my favorite has to be Terry Hatcher, who plays her mom as well as the other mother, because there's so much in that performance. Not only because she has to play two, and you could even argue three characters. She's credited as three. The last one is the Bedlam, which is the sort of spider lady that the other mother evolves into when Coraline goes back into the world after she escapes the first time. And there's so much variety to her character, and that she's playing a lot of roles and she has to voice a bunch of different things. But I think that her performance as the mother is really underrated as well because around the 40-minute mark, you really start to get that motherly love and how much she really does care about Coraline and feels bad that she's moved her across the country and the move has been tough for her. And I think she has a line where she's like, "I'll make it up to you somehow," and then Coraline says, "Oh, like you always do." And just the sadness in her voice is really powerful, and I think adds an extra layer to that mother's performance.
I mean, I mean, her vocal performance is fantastic, but it's like I put the other mother up there as one of the top villains of all time for me. I mean, when you think about it, like the other mother is, she's absolutely terrifying in that she, you know, doesn't think she's doing anything wrong. She thinks she's doing the right thing. And she's so very terrifying and wants to, you know, take care of Coraline in this weird way. But to keep her all for herself and her world and stuff. And she's just terrifying. Like, and the fact that she's like murdered these other kids as well, like all these other lost souls that she's collected. It's like she's evil. She's pure evil. And but the vocal performance on top of it, between, you know, playing both mothers, is great. And then, you know, the more evil she gets towards the end of the movie, they, like, you know, put that, like, that effect over her voice and stuff, and that sounds really cool. And it's just very menacing and chilling. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's one of my favorite all time villains for sure.
yeah, absolutely. It's up there for me too. And I love with her character as far as how she was animated. I love that each time Coraline sees her, her body changes a little bit. And it's sort of a slow that you don't even notice. I didn't notice the first few times I saw it. This slow change into the bedlam that she becomes, and ultimately into this really terrifying spider. And just to see how not only Terry Hatcher's voice changes slowly throughout, but how her body changes and just this creature that morphs into this thing that ultimately wants to keep Coraline there forever. Do you have any theories as to what she wanted to do with Coraline. I know I have my beliefs. I'm curious what you sort of thought was the end game for the other mother.
I think the other mother inherently, like I said, I think at the beginning, like before she starts unraveling, I think she inherently does want to have something to take care of, something in that world that is hers, and she does. She wants to please her, and she wants to make Coraline happy. But then it's once Coraline starts getting skeptical and stuff, is whenever the other mother starts unraveling, and then she's just like, well, now I just want to eat you, by the end of the movie. But the fact that she inherently does like actually want to take care of her just in her own, weird way, and then just kind of being like, it was just kind of an afterthought of like, well, what do I have to do to be able to stay here? And she's just like, oh, just sew some buttons in your eyes, no big deal. I think that's what makes her the scariest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you thought she wants to, that her sort of opinion and her feeling on what she wants to do with Coraline develops over the movie. Because I was sort of under the belief that she sort of had this end game that she is sort of this mythical spider almost, and where there's the web at the end that Coraline has to climb up from, and like it's almost the whole movie is almost sort of a metaphor of this cat and mouse game between like a spider and a fly, and sort of trying to lull this creature in so you can capture them and eat them and keep them there forever. And I think that there's a lot of interesting sort of spider imagery with the other mother, but she certainly is a really interesting character who you can interpret a lot of different ways because there's just so much interesting details on her. I love how the father, same thing, he also starts to change, but he almost starts to erode, and you find out that really he's just sort of a construct of this world like everything else. And I love that scene where he's playing the piano the second time and he's like almost melting, and he's like slurring his words and freaks Coraline out.
Yeah, no, that's a super creepy scene as well. Whenever he's just like, oh, why the long faces? Oh man, yeah, and he's like literally like kind of melting and just like, because he's not in a thing. Like he's just kind of like you said, a projection of the other mother and that other world and stuff. And it's that's when Coraline starts to see like that this world is kind of falling apart as well if she does not, submit. So it's terrifying. But there's just, when you think of all these little details that went into the writing of this movie, like this is a very tight script, like very, very tight. There's not too many, thing like logic flaws or anything. Like there's no loose ends. Like it's a very tight script, and they like everything is there, but the details are just, it's incredible. This movie, boils down to all of the little things, like you said, the little things that you don't notice, like the color palettes between the two different worlds as well is something that you notice. Her real world is very dull and the bluish gray color palette, and then in the other world is very vibrant, very colorful, has like almost a red overtone to it instead of blue. So just all the little details of this movie are just amazing.
Definitely. And I think this is a movie not only has great production design to go with a really tight script. I love this movie and how it's made because it really sets itself up for success in that it's really sort of this small scale story that keeps itself contained and doesn't try to be overly ambitious on the sort of on its front, so it can make itself easier to not have these flaws, and be a movie that the more you think about it, you go, that doesn't really make sense. I don't really like that. And I love that this movie ultimately is really just the idea of be careful what you wish for, and they turned it into a great story. And I love stories that can take sort of these really simple like ideas that has been used a million times before, but make it so unique through the characters, through the direction, through how it's shot, through its visuals, and make it into something that's unique from any other story like Home Alone that follows sort of along the same lines of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, and this movie actually This movie actually expands past the book. We were kind of talking, both of us agreed that we enjoyed the movie more than the book. Neil Gaiman didn't think that the book could be turned into anything past about a 45-minute short film, is what he imagined. So the fact that they were able to make a full-length feature film out of the idea and add to the mythology in a positive way is something that isn't really done with a lot of, literature to movie adaptations. So that's incredible in itself as well. But it's just the movie itself it's fantastic. It's just super layered, and it's going to hold up very well over time as well. Like, just due to the high production, the quality of the script. Like, this movie is already 8 years old and still holds up super well. And I think this is a movie that 20 years down the line, I'm going to be able to still rewatch and enjoy it with the same enjoyment I always have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really helps that the stop motion is practical and that they're actually filming something. So that way the animation is not going to look like worn out and look old over time, because they're still filming something that's actually there. And that is really what is so great about stop motion and so great about what Laika has done. Although I will say, I think I have not seen the box trolls, but I'll say that this is the only time for me that Laika has melded the beautiful animation that they have with this really tight script and story and characters that I really, really care about. I need to rewatch Paranorman, but I felt like both that and Kubo were a little bit lighter as far as the non-visual stuff, and I really appreciate that this movie really has everything and is the whole package.
I still haven't seen Paranorman, but I absolutely love Kubo and the Two Strings, but Coraline is still easily the strongest of the films. You're not missing out on much on Box Trolls. Box Trolls is kind of weird, actually. It has a really weird premise, and it's probably the most, like, cringe-inducing of any of Laika's movies, but, like, not in the good way.
Sure.
But, yeah, Coraline definitely... like, it just has it all. Like, it's a near perfect movie for me. Like, I still don't have any perfect movies. This is definitely a masterpiece, I'll say that. But it's a near perfect movie, because, like, the nitpicks that I would have of this movie are probably very, very small.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think I have a small nitpick here and there, but this is one of my favorite animated movies of all time. Yeah, I think it was really interesting that you added to talking about the book to film adaptation relationship, and how oftentimes when you have a book, you have to take stuff away, or they add too much really weird filler while still taking stuff away. And I think Coraline hits that perfect balance, and it's really incredible that they added quite a few different things and even removed a few things and changed stuff, and none of it ever feels unnecessary. This is an hour 40-minute movie that I easily could want more. It's such a easy watch from a pacing perspective, and I think that really is due to just how well made overall this movie is from really every angle and aspect, and just that it is one of those seemingly almost unfilmable stories makes it that much more impressive and that much more of a testament to Laika, and the fact that this was Laika's first film. I think that is really just incredible.
Yeah, they definitely set the bar very high for themselves with this movie. And, not even just from an animated movie perspective, like I hold it to the respect of just a movie in general that is just very well put together, very well balanced. It's very paced very well. It's and the rewatchability factor, because rewatchability is a big factor for me. If it's a movie that I truly love, then it's, a movie that I'm going to revisit time and time again. And I definitely do. I watch it all the time. It's another movie, I can put it on in the background and maybe not, like, while I'm editing something. And, even if I'm not giving it my full attention, you still have the awesome score to listen to at the very least. And it's a movie, like, you can really just listen to it without even having to watch it, and you still get the full story, which I think is very interesting as well. So it's gonna hold up super well, and it definitely has a very high place. Like, I'm currently reworking my like top 50 all time, but it's in the top 20 for sure. Maybe even top 15 for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely in my top 30 anywhere around there. I need to figure out my all-time list as well, but it is definitely up there. Obviously, as you were saying, how rewatchable this movie is. I think another thing that's so great is you can sort of turn this movie on at any time and really get into it. And I think that's due to how many great moments there are. Do you have any favorite moments from this movie, like ones that just really stick out to you and oftentimes are just burned into your brain because of how much they freaked you out on that first watch?
I mean, there's a lot of just amazing scenes. I wish there were one of my nitpicks is I wish there were more musical scenes because I think the scene with the other father singing the piano is a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Um, like my sisters, they always like sing that song and they like sing it really obnoxiously and it's super funny. But I think that's a very fun scene. But then the scene in the end, especially in the climax with the spider web and everything, and it has these flashing like purple and green like lights to it and stuff, and it really has a super. That's when the score gets like super high pitched and menacing, and it's. I mean, the climax is super exciting, and then I love the scene of the world kind of falling apart as well and dismantling itself. I think, I mean, there's so many awesome moments. Like you said, it's kind of one of those movies. Like if it was like on TV with commercials and stuff, and you just like kind of turned it on, like, oh, I've missed the first 30 minutes of it, but you just kind of turn it on. You're like, you can still hop right into it and finish the whole thing.
Yeah, this movie would be terrible with commercials though, because anytime something like super tense would happen, they'd cut to break and you'd be like, I need to see this. Like, even if you've already seen it, like the other mother throws her into the mirror and they cut to, some Febreze commercial. I'd lose my mind. I'm like, I need to see what's gonna happen next. I need to see if Coraline's gonna be okay because that movie is just so tense. I love that you mentioned the other father singing the song. Actually, originally they had planned for the band They Might Be Giants, who also sang the Malcolm in the Middle theme song, to do 10 different songs for this movie, but they planned on using a darker tone, so they only used that one song. But it is so great and it's so catchy, and I love that your sisters, who I'm not sure how old they are compared to myself, used to sing that song all the time because I used to too. And that song is just one of those catchy songs that's I'm forever gonna enjoy because of just how catchy and fun it is. And I love that it really does entice Coraline to want to stay in this world and entice someone like me who was a little bit younger than Coraline was when I first saw this movie, and just how fun and great that song is, and how it really adds to the seduction of this world. And it's a really great ad and a great moment.
Yeah, for sure. And even the fact that you say seduction, like it really is kind of this. It's a very luring thing, and it's just another one of those small details, and because music kind of plays a big part in the movie in general. Even when he's out in the garden and the flowers are like making the horn sounds and stuff, and that's really fun. And then the dinner scene, like, because the father, that's kind of the way he's meant to be. He, has the way that he talks is very lyrical and melodic and stuff. And it's just another small detail that you can appreciate from this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's just so many great moments. Another one that I love is when she goes to see the show of the two old ladies and they're singing this really like sexually like inappropriate song that's sort of another reference to like growing up and how Coraline's like they're almost naked, and it's like I remember thinking the exact same thing, like this is PG, should I be watching this as a 10-year-old?
They're like they're like almost naked and have huge boobs. I'm
Yeah.
like they were very voluptuous. So I was like, geez Louise. I was like, what? Yeah, like the movie takes like a sharp turn for a sec, and one of those scenes that puts you in a state of discomfort, and it's just yeah. I always remember those scenes. I'm just like, man, this is where things start getting really weird.
Totally. And I love that a small detail I picked up on this watch through was that in the background, it's a picture of Odysseus and his crew from the Odyssey on the ship, and they tied Odysseus up to the mast because he wants to go to the Sirens, and it's depicting the scene of the Sirens in the Odyssey, which is another sort of cool tie-in to this main theme of the movie, which is sort of this seduction through this seemingly beautiful thing that draws you in, but really the person who's drawing you in really just wants to eat you. And I thought that was a really cool callback to, or an allusion to, another sort of moment in a work of literature that is very related to this story in Coraline. And I think that there's just a lot of those great sort of small references, whether it be literary or anything else. I know they quote Hamlet in that scene as well, which was super cool. And there's a lot of cool
Yeah.
stuff that you can look up afterwards.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's like a little featurette on the Coraline DVD that's really interesting, and it gives you some more background stuff. But yeah, the Odyssey is definitely a heavily influenced. I mean, the story itself is almost just a gothic telling of the Odyssey, pretty much, and they have a really nice parallel to them.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. Another moment that I think is great, and there's so many of them, is how freaky, and once again, this is a testament to how great Ian McShane is. Mr. Bobinsky is when she goes to see him to get the kid's eye, and he's saying like in this very sort of like slurring Russian accent, like you don't wanna leave, you don't want to go back to the world where no one loves you. Stay, and we'll love you forever. And just the imagery of how freaky he is, where there's no body, he's really just like a suit floating around. Like it really sort of hits you on this really freaky sort of visceral level, and that's what a lot of the movie does. But that moment in particular really stood out to me.
Yeah, he like kind of has like this boogeyman look feel towards the end, and he's not as cool and exciting as he was before. And then yeah, like definitely the vocal performance of you know he kind of has the same effect of like the other father with the slurring and like the decomposing and just being kind of a construct of that world. It's a super terrifying scene with all the rats and stuff. I've never been a big fan of rodents, so that's a very creepy scene.
Same thing that the cat said. I've never been a big fan of rats on the best of days, but this one was spying. What I love so much about the looking glass that she has to like find the children's eyes. For the longest time, I thought that it was, when I was younger, I didn't care, but I thought it was sort of this MacGuffin to get through the story. But they actually have a sort of cool like reason for it. I don't know if you remember exactly what was made. They make the sort of looking glass or the stone out of the three taffies that the old ladies had, and those taffies are actually the years in which the previous kids had gone into the other mother's world and been taken.
Oh, I never noticed that, but that's a really interesting small detail to add into there. But I had actually never noticed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so cool because it would make sense that these taffies are sort of put together so that way, and it's representing each of them so she can see their eyes, and because it sort of has this cool sort of spiritual connection to them. Obviously, this movie is has sort of fantasy elements to it, but it makes sense enough that it's a cool thing to think about. One other sort of small detail that I noticed, that this might not mean anything, but I love movies that really make you really want to dig into the small details and wonder even like if this was intentional. I love how early on in the first one of the first scenes with YB, which also is cool because it sort of sets up this classic sort of slasher feel, like super cheesy, where he's got the mask and there's like the lightning in the background and it freaks her out. And that's just a great moment in general because it's sort of playing with the idea of horror. And I love movies that can do that while also still being really scary. This movie really does have a lot of cool sort of meta elements to it. But she steps in or she's holding onto the poison oak. That's the water dowsing rod. And I wanted to see if there was any connection between poison oak or poison ivy and spiders. And the thing that I realized when I was doing my research was apparently how similar like a poison ivy or poison oak rash on your hand looks to a spider bite. and how interesting it was that the other mother cures it and that she sort of reveals herself to be a spider-like creature. And I just thought that was, whether or not that was intentional or not, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that's just there to possibly just to make you think. I mean, it could go either way, but it'd be a real interesting concept if it was.
Yeah, totally. So I know you said that this is one of your favorite movies of all time. Where does this rank amongst animated films for you all time? And is there sort of something about an animated movie that makes an animated movie elite, like a Coraline? I know you're a big fan of The Nightmare Before Christmas. Is there something about those movies that makes them your favorite animated movie? Is there a through line?
I mean, not really. I mean, I think just with animated films, I think they have a special range that they have as far as creating something, creating a world. Since this isn't something real world, it's something that they are creating for us, and the fact that with the stop motion, it's an actual, these are actual tangible sets and everything as well. It's not just straight up animation. So it really gives you that you get the depth from it, I suppose. So, if an animated film can take me to another place and immerse me into the world and, get good vocal performances out of it. But at the same time, this movie is very layered. It's not just a, kids animated film. It is just kind of its own animated thing. And, so, I mean, it ranks up there pretty high with my favorite animated films. Probably right behind Nightmare and Hercules, but behind those two, I'd say Coraline is right there, and or maybe behind The Incredibles too, but it's still very, very much up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it was interesting that you talked about how it's not just a kids movie and that this movie never does feel pandering. It feels like they made the story that they wanted to make, and then it just happened to be PG. It never felt like it was a movie that pandered to be the PG rating, that felt to be like, is it's honestly one of the, if I can even say it this way, edgiest PG movies I've ever seen. Like, it could easily have been a PG-13 film, and I've honestly seen PG-13 movies that are more appropriate for younger kids than this one. And I really like that, and I think that's what makes some of my favorite animated movies stand out amongst other animated movies, which is a genre that I don't usually love like a lot of other people do, because I think my favorite animated movies of all time, I don't really have a number one, but all sort of tied for first are this, Anomalisa, the Lego Movie, and Monsters Inc. And I think all of them don't really ever pander, and I think they really want to tell sort of honest and really interesting and almost sort of, although they're not humans, in Monsters Inc., human stories, and that they all have characters that you really, really can connect to. The Incredibles as well, which is another one that's up there for me. And just these flawed, interesting, even if they're not human characters. And all of them tend to sort of, especially with Anomalisa in the Lego Movie, subvert your expectations and go a different way that you weren't expecting and really pleasantly surprise you, which is what Coraline did for me. This is a movie that still holds up. I just watched it a couple days ago, and I still love it from my cinephile ivory tower. But this is a movie that I will always love, in part because of how much it means to me from my childhood and how it's one of those handful, maybe 10 film going experiences where I can remember how I felt watching the movie, and I can remember it changing, maybe not exactly who I am as a person, but changing my opinion on film. And I think it's such an important, and it's such a really seminal movie to me. And I think that's really what I love so much about this movie. Do you have any closing thoughts, Devon?
And now I think we pretty much hit all the bases. Like, I mean, I think we hit all the bases, really. This definitely ranks up there with my favorite films of all time, not even just animated. But it's a movie that holds up really well over time, and you can keep watching it and appreciate the little details, or like finding more things that you want to research into more. But it's, a movie that, like I said, always kind of played into my movie sensibilities as far as, these darker, weirder movies, with the horror elements as well, being a big horror fan. It's a fantastic movie that, I still don't think, I mean, I think people over time have given it more credit, but I still don't think it has gotten the credit it deserves. But I mean, it's definitely like more popular than it was whenever it first came out. But I think over time, people will appreciate Coraline even more as it continues to hold up, and maybe some other animated films won't. So um, I think that speaks volumes to as a not only just an animated film, but a film in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really developed this great sort of cult status that I hope continues to grow. And I hope more people will see this, especially young girls who can hopefully be inspired by Coraline. And that can be sort of their hero growing up. Because I think that there's a lot of great things that both little boys and girls and even adults can learn from that movie. It's been great talking to you about one of my all time favorites, DeVaughn. I know this is a favorite of yours too. And I love that we share that bond of loving a movie that isn't as well known as maybe some of the other quote unquote animated greats. It's been great talking to you. Where can the people find you, Devon?
The people can always find me on Twitter is where I do most of my damage. I tweet a lot about movies, guys. So follow me at Deezus12. But of course, I host a movie podcast called Deezus Take the Reel. It's basically a late night uncensored talk show, and we play games and tell stories and talk about movies that we love. So you can find me as well at Deezus TT Reel on Twitter as well, and on Instagram at Deezus.12.
Absolutely. I highly recommend the podcast. Devon does a lot of really good stuff. Once again, it's been great having you on. You can find me at CWein21. That's CWEIN 21. I'm going to make socials for the show. I haven't done that yet. They'll probably be out by the time this episode comes out. But in the meantime, I really hope whenever you are listening to this that you've enjoyed us breaking down Coraline. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening.